Welcome back to Jerusalem Minute. My name is Josh Hasten, correspondent for JNS News. I am here in studio with the CEO of JNS, Alex Traiman. We are in the heart of Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. Unfortunately, Alex, we're going to start with some bad news. More soldiers killed in Gaza, more IDF soldiers killed. Another scenario where soldiers entered a booby-trapped building over the weekend. The IDF on Saturday evening identified 3 IDF soldiers who were killed in action in southern Gaza. 3 killed, 14 other troops wounded, 6 of them seriously as a result of a blast in a booby-trapped building in the Khan Yunis area. So unfortunately, bad news as we start another week here in the state of Israel. And the question really, a lot of the commentators were talking about this on TV last night. Why does this keep happening? Why this is the second major attack like this in 2 weeks where the IDF soldiers walked into a booby-trapped building, many killed and many others wounded. Why are we seeing this, Alex?
Well, thanks, Josh. I think the question is, why isn't it happening as much as we're seeing now? We knew from the very beginning, and there was the argument before Israel went into Gaza, that you're going into a highly booby-trapped urban fighting environment. The IDF started in the north. They're now proceeding to operate in the south, in Khan Yunis, getting set to operate in Rafah. These are the 2 last strongholds. This is where all of the Hamas terrorists have concentrated themselves, and all the last remaining weaponry is, the senior leadership. So I think we understood that this was a likely scenario, that these buildings were going to be booby-trapped, and it's so heartbreaking to read the news. And every Israeli, I think it's so important to understand, every Israeli wakes up every day just waiting with bated breath to see, what the news is going to be in the morning, and if a soldier was killed. And also important to remember, who are these soldiers, right? These are the loved ones of every Israeli. Everybody knows a soldier that's been injured or killed inside Gaza. Everybody knows somebody that's been kidnapped, taken hostage. So, this is the horrific part of a very, very real war against Hamas.
And when you talk about injuries, this isn't just simply broken arms and legs and whatnot. I mean, you're talking about people who are losing limbs and really life-altering injuries for themselves and for their families. So we talk about those who were killed. Obviously, that's the worst-case scenario, but those who are wounded also, it's life-changing. It's not, please God, a lot of these soldiers will recover and lead somewhat of a normal life in this alternate reality, but the injuries are just devastating. And last night they were debating on TV. They were talking about, the fact that the soldiers were going into these booby-trapped buildings. Why aren't they firing more from the air? And, we were discussing the fact that just logistically, it's physically and physically impossible to actually bomb each and every building because of a lack of ammunition. You just don't have, there's hundreds of thousands of structures. And of course, the IDF, we know, tries to be as careful as possible. And when it comes to protecting the lives of our soldiers, with that being said, it's very, very difficult in terms of the situation. And we don't have the ability to bomb each and every building. And I've heard soldiers say this as well.
Yeah, there are some soldiers especially that have said, we know we've identified where the sources of fire are, and we're no longer getting the support that we had in the very early stages of the war, where immediately artillery or air power would come and bomb a building. And that's happening for a couple of reasons. Number one, there's definitely a lot of international pressure against just bombing that is called by the international community indiscriminate bombing, even though this is precision-guided bombing. But I think more to the point that you raised, that there simply aren't enough weapons to go around, not just to fight the war in Gaza, but it's a very real scenario that Israel might find itself soon fighting against Hezbollah. And if it fights against Hezbollah, Hezbollah has so many more rockets and missiles pointed at Israel than Hamas in Gaza, that all of the air power has to be saved, because they're going to have to pound away as hard as they can, as fast as they can, if they have to go into southern Lebanon. So they're simply stockpiling whatever they have, and if they can take out a building in Gaza using soldiers, they're choosing to do it. But as we see here, this isn't the first time. There can be deadly consequences.
I was in the north on Thursday in the Haifa area, and there was a red alert, and then all of a sudden an explosion overhead. So that's what the people are going through in the north, and of course in the south and in Judea and Samaria, we had yet another deadly terror attack. in the exact same spot where there was a deadly terror attack last June. In this case, 2 Israelis were murdered at the gas station outside of the community of Eli. Last June, 4 were murdered right there. You actually had a reservist who just came home. He's the owner of the restaurant, the hummus restaurant at the gas station. He took out one of the terrorists. I believe it was 3 terrorists in total, opened fire, murdering 2 Israelis, including a 16-year-old boy and a 57-year-old. And the 57-year-old father of 3, grandfather of 2. The guy was a volunteer in Zaka, in Mada, and Hatzala, just a gem.
All the emergency services.
Yeah, exactly. Emergency first responders, just a gem of a man. And of course, snuffing out the life of a 16-year-old high schooler from the community of Dolev.
Just sitting in a car. As they're pumping gas.
Yeah, pumping gas. And that is the sad reality. And by the way, it's important to note that the person who carried out this murderous attack wasn't a member of Hamas. He was a policeman from the Palestinian Authority, the same Palestinian Authority that Israel agreed to the Oslo peace accords with. And we gave them the training and the weapons along with the United States.
Exactly.
And they turned, once again, another case of turning their weapons on Israelis.
These are American-trained Palestinian Authority police officers. They have assault rifles. They're supposed to use them
to fight Hamas.
To fight Hamas,
Yeah.
Exactly. And instead we see, the folly of this policy. I mean, you're not asking me the most important strategic question, which is why are there restaurants and gas stations? No, but that's a common in Israel. But, where we see now the second deadly shooting attack in just about a week. There was one last week we talked about on the show outside a checkpoint on the entrance to Jerusalem coming from the Judea city of Ma'ale Adumim. And as we get closer to Ramadan now, there is definitely the fear that we might start to see more and more of these style attacks, intifada brewing in Judea and Samaria. It's a very, very tenuous situation. And of course, the IDF doesn't want to be fighting on the Judea and Samaria front. This is one of the reasons why they talk about trying to not cause friction on the Temple Mount during Ramadan, because they don't want to give anybody inside Judea and Samaria. And most of the Palestinians inside Judea and Samaria have remained calm during this crisis with Gaza. But as the crisis continues on, as we get closer to Ramadan, as we start to see more and more successful attacks, you worry that there could be more copycats.
Yeah, you had a Lee in the week before Ma'ale Adumim on the Highway 1 leading to Jerusalem, those attacks. But the attention of the world is not focused on Israelis being killed at gas stations or in their cars on the highway. The focus of the world is on things that happened, like we saw the images on television in Gaza. And I'm not talking about IDF soldiers getting hurt. I'm talking about a scenario where you had dozens of Gazans who were reportedly killed during a riot which erupted, reported by JNS News, following the entry of aid trucks into the northern Gaza Strip last Thursday morning. Initial Israeli investigation found that most died from being crushed, run over, or trampled. So you had a mass of people all convening together at one point trying to get aid from this truck. And, we've seen situations like that in soccer games, football, if you call it football, in Europe, where people are trampled in stadiums. And this, if you read the news, though, by the way, if you saw some of the main news sources, you would think that this was a massacre. And the Arabs actually are calling it a massacre. In other countries, some of the Arab nations are calling this a massacre. The IDF carried out a massacre, which is absolutely not true. There were people who gathered and they were trampled, possibly run over by the truck itself, trying to get aid, yet the world went crazy and blamed Israel for this massacre. And of course, they are silent when Hamas steals the aid. And more video clips, if you're on Telegram, you can see it on a daily basis. Hamas is stealing the aid from these people, yet Israel's the bad guy here.
Yeah, and it takes us back to early on in the war, in just the first weeks, when there was a rocket that misfired from inside Gaza. It slammed into the compound of a hospital. And within minutes, the international community and mainstream media, BBC, CNN, Reuters, others, all reporting that Israel had bombed the hospital in the Gaza Strip, killing 500 people, only for it to be learned later that it was a Palestinian Islamic Jihad missile that misfired, that hit into the parking lot outside of the hospital after midnight, and probably less than a few dozen people were killed, not hundreds. But still, even if you log on now and you search this incident on Reuters, for example, you'll see as many as 24 headlines that all say that Israel bombed the hospital, killing 500 people. So this is, again, a part of the blood libel. And there's incredible drone footage that you can see, actually, of the people moving around. It almost looks like a petri dish. Israel is bringing in trucks of humanitarian assistance every day into the Gaza Strip. The international community only saying how many Israel isn't bringing in, not giving Israel credit for the overwhelming amount of humanitarian assistance that they're bringing in, more than any country's ever brought into a war zone in a period of war. And these trucks, there was a convoy of trucks moving towards the northern Gaza Strip. And what happens is the situation in Gaza for residents there is difficult. I mean, the food is scarce. And when these trucks come in, people hear that the trucks are going to come in and they rush to get. This truck came in at 4:30 in the morning, and there was a crowd of people just trying to get whatever they could get off of these trucks. They stormed the trucks. People trampled each other, like you said. The trucks actually ran over people that were trying to get food. Then you also had Hamas operatives coming in because they want to get control of the trucks themselves. They to take whatever they can and to have control over the distribution to prove that they're still in charge. And so they started opening fire on the crowd. And then at the same time, you had others that were opening fire on the Israeli position that was allowing these trucks to move through, because Israel has to protect these trucks until they get to their destinations. And they started opening fire on Israelis, the IDF, and then the IDF had to open fire back on the ones that they were getting fired at from. And so it was basically a whole melee, and it was a dangerous situation. And you mentioned, of course, that the international community, including the United Nations, they want to censure Israel for what happened, even though the facts really prove that it wasn't Israel's fault.
Yeah, absolutely. And I saw videos this morning also of aid trucks from Israel going into Gaza being attacked by Arabs there, pelting them with rocks, literally hurting those drivers, doing whatever they can to try to stop the trucks, even physical violence, trying to take out the drivers and so they can get the aid, because everyone knows the aid goes directly to Hamas.
And I was speaking this week to Minister Ron Dermer, the Minister of Strategic Affairs. He's a member of the War Cabinet in Israel. He sits with Netanyahu and Gantz and Eisenkot and Gallant. And he said that Hamas is going to eat the last pita in Gaza. Okay, that they're going to make sure that any food supplies, whatever exists, is going to be theirs, because they simply don't care about the residents of the Gaza Strip. They care primarily about their own survival.
So you mentioned the UN. I want to get to that, but I also want to mention here that President Biden, I think it is a direct result of that stampede, which the world turned on Israel over. Biden announced on Friday the United States will begin airdropping staple items to what he calls Palestinians, the Arabs in Gaza. He was talking with the Italian Prime Minister at a press briefing. And Biden said we need to do more to help the Palestinians in the wake of the aid riot on Thursday, which dozens of Gazans were killed. And at that same press conference, the President of the United States, the leader of the free world, several times, instead of talking about mentioning Gaza, he made the mistake of calling Gaza the Ukraine several times. And that, I think really leads us to think that, after seeing him several weeks ago, getting confused between Egypt and Mexico. I mean, I personally think it's a little bit scary. I mean, the leader of the free world is in that state of mind.
Yeah, but I'll tell you something else about it, and it's about the mindset, right? Because in the very beginning of this war, remember, Hamas launched a brutal attack, unprovoked, on Israel. And so on October 7th, if people are looking at what's going on in Russia, Ukraine, on October 7th, Hamas was Russia and Israel was Ukraine. Okay, but now, months on into the war, you get this where people now think that, well, Gaza's Ukraine and Israel is like Russia. So the international community was with Israel on the day that they were the victim. But when Israel does what it needs to do to ensure that it can never be a victim again, then the narrative switches completely, and all of a sudden it is only the Gazans that are the victims, and it's Israel that's the aggressor.
Yeah, it felt like we had about 5 minutes there, and that was about it. And it took, we're going to talk about the UN, it took the UN, the Women's Committee, or whatever it is, like 50 days or something, to condemn the horrific sexual crimes carried out by Hamas. It's just a complete embarrassment. And the UN, speaking of, they're going crazy. that they cannot pass a resolution in the Security Council condemning Israel. The United States keeps vetoing it. So you have an entire day, it looks like, earmarked to talk about the situation in Israel and in Gaza. You have them discussing why they can't pass this resolution against Israel, ironically not Hamas, but Israel. You have them talking about UNRWA. And also you have an effort by the Arab nations and others trying to give Palestine, which has observer status in the UN right now, trying to give them official status. So on Monday, you're going to have an entire day at the UN earmarked towards bashing Israel, complaining about the way Israel is treating the Arabs in Gaza, General Assembly holding an urgent session on Israel's effort to defund and disband UNRWA. You're going to have the support of UNRWA there. Only natural, it's the UN. It's one of their aid organizations, despite the fact that you had proof that UNRWA representatives took part in the October 7th massacre. And then you have the Arab group of nations trying to push their agenda, which is to have Palestine be recognized as an official state, which, it certainly is not.
I want to read here a tweet that former ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, read out. He said, "Keep an eye on the U.S. at the UN this week. It created some pro-Israel capital by vetoing a prior anti-Israel resolution, and people who have seen the drafts currently circulating tell me that America is going to now spend that capital on an anti-Israel resolution that is even worse. Pay attention, please." So, yes, the United States has utilized the veto in Israel's favor really since the beginning of the war, and of course the UN just continues to bring up anti-Israel resolution after resolution, both in the General Assembly and also the Security Council. The United States has been there to veto in the Security Council. It's one of the most important things that Israel depends on the United States to do. David Friedman cautioning that might not be the case, and that there may be some surprises waiting for Israel at the UN Security Council in the coming week.
Let's say with the obsession with every single week, it seems like we're talking about different news, different moves taken by the Biden administration against the residents of Judea and Samaria, or trying to create this unilateral Palestinian state. It seems as the time goes on, the situation gets worse and worse in terms of the support from our best friends. And I think we brought it up last week, I'm not sure, but if we didn't, the American people support the state of Israel. A poll was taken that showed that 80% of the American people, I don't know who those 20% support Hamas are, but over 80% of the American people understand that Israel is the good guy here and they should be on our side. So we definitely have the support of the American people, but as David Friedman is worried, the support of the government, the Biden administration, is lessening as time goes on.
You also have the support of the Congress.
Yes.
That's very important too. And then we'll talk about it a little bit later, that we are seeing a lot of support across party lines, by the way. Certainly in the Republican Party and even among many of the moderate members of the Democratic Party, there's overwhelming support for Israel. They understand that Hamas is an officially designated terrorist organization. It's a proxy of Iran. And that Israel is an ally that offers tremendous benefits to the United States. It's not just a one-way relationship. Israel is probably the most reliable and important ally that the United States has in the world today.
Alex, I see you had the opportunity to speak to who I consider to be a great man, former U.S. ambassador to Israel, David Friedman. You had the privilege of speaking to him this week about several topics, including Judea and Samaria and what the future holds, and specifically perhaps a plan for the future of Judea and Samaria. What can you tell us about it?
Well, as you note, that the Biden administration, the Europeans are talking about however they can fast-track the creation of a Palestinian state, which would be a horrific reward for the terrorism of October 7th. It would be decoupling the concept of Palestinian statehood from the formula, which was called Land for Peace, decoupling statehood from peace. And David Friedman, who knows something about creating peaceful conditions in the Middle East, when he was the ambassador to Israel from the United States, it was among the quietest period here in Israel because the Palestinians understood that the United States stood behind Israel, and the United States moved the embassy to Jerusalem. They recognized Israeli sovereignty in the Golan Heights, and they said that settlements are not inconsistent with international law, which is something that now the Biden administration is reversing. But more importantly than that, when Friedman was ambassador, they worked on a framework to try to bring economic incentives to the Palestinians. And this was the forerunner to the signing of the historic Abraham Accords, which normalized relations between Israel and the Emirates, Bahrain. Israel's now on a path to normalize relations with Saudi Arabia, and it's all based on pushing back against belligerent Iran and against and in favor of commercial normalization between peoples. And so Friedman has now come out very clearly in favor of Israel actually implementing its own sovereignty throughout all of Judea and Samaria and presenting a plan for local governance by Palestinians over Palestinians and a tremendous amount of investment, a so-called type of Marshall Plan for Palestinians in Judea and Samaria that would be funded in part by those nations that signed the normalization agreements with the state of Israel. And certainly the Europeans and the Americans would not be in favor of such a plan. But it's important to note that Donald Trump, who was the president that first appointed Friedman as ambassador, is cruising towards the Republican primary victory, will be the Republican candidate. If Trump somehow manages to become president again in the beginning of 2025, a strong likelihood that Friedman either will be reappointed ambassador or appointed to some other significant policy position that would relate to the Middle East and Israel. And the plan that he's presenting may be presented to the president as something that he would consider supporting if there's a new administration in town.
So first of all, go to jns.org and check out Alex's exclusive interview with former ambassador for the United States to Israel, David Friedman. That's number one. And number two, just to comment on the things you said, how things have changed over the years, and very sadly, all the accomplishments that were made in large part to the leadership of Ambassador Friedman under the Trump administration for the state of Israel. All the different things, the recognizing the Golan Heights, Jerusalem, moving the embassy, the Pompeo Doctrine, all of those things, unfortunately, it seems like have been thrown out, at least for now. But as you said before,
well, they haven't all been thrown out. The embassy's still in Jerusalem.
The embassy's still in Jerusalem.
The Israeli sovereignty and the Golan Heights has not been challenged, but
the mindset, it's a mindset different.
But a number of the policies that the Trump administration put forward have been reversed, including, like we mentioned last week, the overturning of the Pompeo Doctrine. And I think it's very dangerous to see how the policies boomerang back and forth, and even if Trump will get back into office, then you have, again, the boomeranging of the policy back the other way. And it's not just policies between the United States and Israel. It's across the Middle East, and it's across the entire world. So if the entire world sees that policy that gets implemented by the United States can just be reversed the next time a president comes in, that makes it very unlikely for real advancements towards peace between nations, because none of the actors in the region and elsewhere can trust that the United States will maintain the commitments that its previous administrations have made.
Well, let's hope we get back on track. And people have to remember, this is the Middle East. This isn't the U.S.-Canadian border. Strength rules in the Middle East. You show signs of weakness and your enemies take advantage of you. So you must be strong. And that certainly was a policy of the last administration.
And I think that for Friedman, what he's looking at here is, A, Israel's the strong power. Israel's the one that can guarantee security in the region. B, that Israel does have biblical ties to the land. It is the indigenous peoples in the land. And C, that only Israel can guarantee that this nation will thrive and for all of its residents, both Israelis and Palestinians together.
Absolutely. And as this all is going on many fronts here in Israel, there are hostage negotiations underway right now, from what I understand, in Egypt between the United States, Israel, either officially or unofficially, Qatar, and I guess representatives of Hamas. And I don't know how that's all working out in the same room, how they're all getting together, but negotiations still underway. It seems like they've been talking about this front and center for the last several weeks now. Israel does have 130 plus hostages unaccounted for in the hands of the evil, which is Hamas. And they're talking about a potential deal headed towards that March 10th date of Ramadan. They want to try to get a deal done by then. The Biden administration alluding to over the weekend, saying that he doesn't think it could get done. Perhaps yes, perhaps no. So a lot of uncertainty. Sure. Maybe you have some more insight on what's going on.
Biden had said that he hoped that there would be a deal by Monday. Right. Now saying, okay, it probably is not going to happen by Monday. He shouldn't have said that. And this issue with the stampede at the humanitarian aid also factors in here, because what's happened is that this so-called massacre, the accusations of a massacre, have given Hamas a ladder to walk down the negotiations, and we're seeing a narrative coming up here in Israel that the Hamas demands just continue to be outsized and outsized even more. Whereby Hamas refuses to give Israel even a list of the hostages that it has in its possession, in its grasp inside the Gaza Strip. Perhaps they don't even know who's alive and who's dead, but they're refusing to do it. They're saying the price for that would be high. If you recall, when Israel and Hamas worked out the temporary truce, the temporary ceasefire, you had a ceasefire which lasted less than 2 weeks' time. You had 110 hostages which were released in that period, and Israel released prisoners, Palestinian prisoners sitting in Israeli jails, at a clip of essentially 3 to 1.
Right.
Even less, because in that 110 you had foreign nationals that weren't Israeli citizens, and Israel did not release prisoners to exchange for those foreign nationals. So the ultimate ratio of Palestinian prisoners released was less than 3 to 1 from the 110. And you're starting to hear now that what Hamas is demanding is either a complete end to the war, which we can talk about that in a second, but a ceasefire which would last maybe as long as 6 weeks, that they would release 40 hostages, which only would include women and children. It wouldn't include the men that are being held inside Gaza, including soldiers, and we know of soldiers that were kidnapped on October 7th. And you're talking about ratios of prisoners that it could be in the 10 to 12 to 1 ratio. So it seems like the demands from Hamas continue to go up and up and up, when, as the Israeli military offensive presses it, you would think it would be the opposite, that Hamas would be more desperate. But you actually see that it's Hamas that's digging down into its position, and Israel, who is desperate because of a lot of domestic pressure to get its hostages back as soon as possible, willing to pay almost any price. Meanwhile, Hamas is looking for reason after reason to get out of the negotiations.
At the same time, speaking of the hostages, you had a very powerful, I would say, march, which took place, a 4-day march. Families of the hostages and other Israelis, of course, marched from the Gaza border to Jerusalem over a 4-day period, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or rather Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. They arrived in Jerusalem. And what I thought was pretty unique about this march from what I saw is the fact that it was for the most part, non-political. You had people, unfortunately, it's become a political situation. Okay, and then the story with the hostages, you have those who are saying, we'll do anything to bring the hostages back. I'm not talking about the families. They have every right to do so. You have those who have taken it to a left versus right, which I think is unfortunate at this time. With this march, which took place, I saw all people, all sides of the political spectrum, all different types of groups, organizations and whatnot, come together, all to march to demand that Hamas release our hostages. And I think that was pretty unique, seeing all these groups come together as one on this 4-day event.
Well, certainly the entire country, left to right, and everyone in between, wants the hostages back. They want Hamas to release the hostages, but there certainly are elements, and particularly among many of the organizers of these marches, that are calling simultaneously for elections. They want elections to take place straight away. It should be understood also that the ad agencies that are printing the signage to support these hostage marches are also the ones who are printing the signage against judicial reforms, were printing the signage against Netanyahu before he was able to form this last government. So there definitely is an element there where those that are against Netanyahu, those that are against this right-wing government that Netanyahu was able to form after this 5th election in a 5-year period, that are trying, sadly and perversely, to use the issue of the hostages as the sort of bulletproof issue. And that's why, we've mentioned it before, that the slogan is not release the hostages. The slogan is bring them home.
Right.
You see these signs that are being printed all over Tel Aviv and elsewhere. They're pictures of Netanyahu on a red background. It says, Atah Harosh, Atah Hashem, you are the head, you are guilty. And they want to try to provoke an election now. But Netanyahu talked about this in a press conference this week about just how dangerous it would be if there were to be an election now, because that would limit the amount of powers that the government has until the election was able, by law, it would limit the amount of powers until the time when the election could take place, until the time when a government could be formed after an election, which we know could take months sometimes, and it would be delivering Hamas a victory that they want and making it much harder for Israel to continue the war.
And we mentioned last week, you had former Prime Minister Ehud Barak calling for elections, but as you just said, elections now would be absolutely disastrous in terms of the war effort, whether in the South or potentially the upcoming war in the North. We can't have that at all.
And also socially, right? Because, these elections, they created a lot of social divisiveness that really led to horrific divisions that we hadn't seen in generations here in Israel. And one of the beautiful things, and it's sad that this had to happen, but one of the beautiful outcomes of the war has been the unifying of the nation. And I think that the nation is united behind the policies that the current government, led by Benjamin Netanyahu, is carrying out inside Gaza, both militarily and diplomatically, including in pushing back against the creation of a Palestinian state. So if the entire country is united around these policies, if the entire country is united around the IDF, if the entire country is united around the repairing the spirit of divisiveness that existed before the war, inviting elections at this time would just create new rifts, reopen the rifts that existed before the war started.
Yeah, the key to all this really is to be united when we don't have war in Israel. And that maybe is a theological or deeper discussion for another day, but unity really is what we have now, and is what we must continue to have when we win this war against Hamas, and then go to war potentially in the North and win that war as well. Picking up on something you said before, you mentioned, we talked about the United States of America, and the American people are behind us, Congress is behind us, and here you actually have a bipartisan show of support, which I believe is a big show of support for Israel, and it's the issue of something we talked about earlier. Also, Biden picking on the residents of Judea and Samaria, issuing sanctions against people arbitrarily, it seems, on people who weren't even arrested in Israel, deciding to, take so-called settlers to task or whatnot. But this past week, you had 9 Senate Republicans, 6 House Democrats conveying a starkly different message to the U.S. president about the alleged settler violence in Judea and Samaria. The Republicans, led by Senator Tom Cotton, demanded that Biden rescind a February 1st executive order sanctioning 4 Israeli settlers, in quotes, and withdraw a February 8th memorandum requiring Israel to promise in writing that it is not violating international law in order to continue receiving U.S. arms and military aid. So you have the Biden administration on one hand, which is issuing these threats against individuals and calling on Israel that, saying that Israel has to account for every single, bullet fired or missile fired or whatnot. But then you do have this bipartisan group of people who are taking the president and the Biden administration to task, saying you have to hold off there, you have to pull back, you can't arbitrarily punish anyone you want in Israel just based on a whim, which really what it seems is going on here.
And until now, really, the Israeli government has not launched a public counter attack or pressure against the Biden administration. But if you don't get some clarity on what's happened here soon, I think you're going to see the Israeli government come out in full force against what the Biden administration has been doing during a war, to be coming out to be talking about settler violence. I mean, we just discussed, 2 shootings by Palestinians, deadly shootings against Israelis. You have Israelis that are afraid to get into their cars in Judea and Samaria. They have absorbed hundreds, if not thousands, of attacks in recent years, and they're becoming deadlier and deadlier as there's more and more rifles and assault rifles in the hands of Palestinians in Judea and Samaria. And here the Biden administration is choosing to sanction settlers who have not been convicted of crimes in Israeli courts. And meanwhile, the United States passed in the previous administration the Taylor Force Act, which forbids the United States from transferring monies to the Palestinian Authority so long as the Palestinian Authority has on its books a terror financing scheme where it pays terrorists who are sitting in Israeli prisons, pays the families of individuals that were killed while carrying out acts of first-degree murder against Jews. So the United States has on its books a law that prevents it from passing money to the Palestinian Authority. Meanwhile, it's violating that law to a terror entity, which is financing and inciting all kinds of terror against Jews throughout all Judea and Samaria. And meanwhile, the U.S. administration chooses to single out and highlight a handful of individuals who have never been convicted of crimes in Israel because some NGOs provided them a list and said that these people are the dangers to peace between Israelis and Palestinians. And I think that the Israeli government is going to come out swinging if the Biden administration does not rescind the executive order, which can happen quickly, by the way. It's an executive order can be revoked just as quickly as it was put into action. So there is that hope that this can be overturned. But if not, I think you're going to see a public rift between the two countries on this.
And people should know it's not only the Palestinian Authority terrorists which are being paid and paid to slay. I mean, they're openly funding Hamas members and their families who carry out attacks against Israelis, including those who carried out the October 7th massacre. They're also part of the PA payroll. We're nearly out of time here, but Alex, did you know today is my Hebrew birthday?
Happy birthday.
Thanks very much. And it's customary on your Hebrew birthday, you're the one who's supposed to give other people blessings. On your English birthday, we can talk about that, but today's my Hebrew birthday, so I want to bless you, first of all. I want to bless JNS. I want to bless everyone who's out there watching. And perhaps most importantly, I want to bless the brave men and women of the IDF who are protecting us 24/7 on all fronts in this country, putting their lives at risk each and every day, 24/7, so that we can sit here in the heart of Jerusalem and broadcast the truth to the world. So I want to bless them. And I want to thank you so much for tuning into another edition of Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. Make sure you continue to follow all the great programming on JNS TV. Also go to jns.org for top-notch news coverage, news and analysis and opinion and everything you could want when trying to make sense of all this here in the state of Israel. Thanks so much, Alex. And everyone out there in the wonderful, wonderful world of ours, be safe. Have a great week. Shalom from Jerusalem, the heartland of the Jewish people, the capital of the state of Israel. Thanks so much.